Hola, amigas and amigos from Colombia who are freestylers. My Spanish is not very good, so if you don't mind, I'll speak in English. And so I wanted to describe the history of freestyle frisbee and relate how it's relevant to Colombian freestyle right now. So freestyle frisbee is the oldest frisbee activity. At its very essence, it is a game of catch and throw. It is, by its very nature, a creative process where it's always finding new ways of doing something, invention. It's also a personal expression, and it's also an object. A frisbee is an object that is best shared. And so that also comes into play quite a bit, where when you're throwing a frisbee, you're sharing it with somebody else. Something else that should be noted is that when a frisbee flies, part of you flies with that. And I think that that explains a lot of the joy of frisbee play. It's not the object that is flying, it is you that is flying between partners through the air, curving, doing creative things. And again, I think that is a large part of the allure of freestyle. So, with the invention of plastics and the invention of the plastic frisbee, that created a whole phenomenon of people who were interested in it. It was originally marketed as a toy, which explains a lot of the background of how people first connected with a frisbee. The old story is that it was sold at public fairs and markets, and it was what was purchased was the invisible string, which it kind of explained how the frisbee was traveling through the air, and the frisbee was free. And I believe that the story is true. So over time, it started to explode in interest, and some formalities came with it. Again, freestyle frisbee play, at its very essence, just being that game of catch and throw, but it's also very progressive. And through time, then the other sports began to emerge as well through a creative process of just natural invention. Also on a frisbee that was marketed by Whammo in the 60s, the Frisbee Pro model, it said, invent games on the back of the frisbee. So it encouraged you to find new ways to express yourself, to learn about what the frisbee can do. And so through the age of general specialization, or at least an increase of formality, then sports such as ultimate frisbee emerged in the late 60s. Disc golf, even though it was played in some forms as early as the 1920s, that also started to take on a more formal process with rules, tournaments, things like that. Freestyle frisbee, even though it was the very first frisbee activity, it did not see any kind of formality until 1974. In 1974, then there was an event in New Jersey called Octad, and Dan the Stork Roddick created a competition where people stand 30 yards apart, and they throw the disc, and somebody throws to you, and if you can do a trick catch, something under the leg, behind the back, behind the head, then you get a point. And then it goes back and forth. There was a flaw within that process, in that if you were a very powerful thrower, and there was a number of powerful throwers at this tournament, then they could just throw it very hard, and there's not a whole lot you could do to react to it in time. Also, this was before some of the innovations such as tipping, nail delaying, cuffing, brushing. None of that was really happening. So move on from the original Octad tournament, and then into the very first formal freestyle tournament, and that was in Toronto at the Canadian Open in 1974. And that was the seminal moment, the genesis moment, if you will, or frisbee freestyle competition. It was put on by Jim Kenner, who would later found Discraft, creators of the Ultrastar and the Sky Styler, among others. And then Ken Westerfield, who was also a legendary Canadian player. And they won the competition. What was interesting was the level of skill had developed dramatically from just a few months prior. It was really going off. People were starting to find new ways of expressing themselves, new techniques, new tricks. And the biggest thing that happened next was controlled tipping. So being able to tip it and then do it repetitively, so you could do multiple tips, 10, 20, 30 tips, and then do a controlled catch at the end of that. That was the original way of controlling a Frisbee. Shortly after that, the nail delay was introduced in 1976. And that took over and, in time, replaced the tip as the method of control. Other techniques were invented at this time. The airbrush, the body roll was invented by Ken Westerfield just prior to that. It was called the Canadian Mind Blower. But then also cuffing, max, things like that, they also came into vogue. And then obscure things like kerfuffles and puddles and other weird techniques. Again, this was all people just experimenting, just trying to find new ways of doing cool stuff with this Frisbee. Now, from 1977 until probably about 1981 was a period of rapid growth. There was tournaments that were set up. Freestyle became its own entity in 1980 due to Dave Marini branching out away from Whammo. And then that set up a whole new tour of just freestyle tournaments. So originally they were housed with other events in an overall format: distance, maximum time aloft, accuracy, double disc court, golf. Other sports were coupled in with freestyle at these tournaments. But with Dave Marini and the foundation of the Freestyle Players Association, then they had their standalone tournaments. They had their own rules. They were their own governing body. And that was a dramatic shift from being part of the Whammo family, which was a corporation whose sole intent was to sell more Frisbees. Not a bad thing. But they didn't like competition, and they didn't like the open mindset of being able to have influence from outside of their own realm. So that was what the FPA, Freestyle Players Association, achieved, was that sort of independence. Now, there was a rapid period of growth that happened after that. And through the early 80s into even towards the late 80s, then the sophistication that happened with the top-level freestylers was just incredible. It was beyond what anybody could ever have imagined. You have fantastic athletes who are very creative, and they're introducing new techniques, and their skills were developed. The routines, the co-ops became more elaborate, more sophisticated. The use of music, the use of movement, there was money. All of this was made for a fantastic period of growth. Now, after that, into the early, even the mid-90s. By the mid-90s, then the sport was actually dying. There were very few new players who were coming into the sport. And that was a period of regression. In 1998, there was a very popular ultimate Frisbee tournament in Rimini, Italy, called Paganello. And at that tournament, then they introduced freestyle as a side activity. It was during the evening, so all of the beach ultimate had concluded. There was a big party, lots of beer and wine were flowing. Everyone was eating a lot of pasta and relaxing. And in the evening in the tent, then the freestyle competition was presented. And it had a resounding, tremendous positive effect. You had hundreds of young Europeans who were very athletic, seeing this for the very first time and going, that's what I want to do. And so there was a huge period of growth that happened in the late 80s. And 2003, Nike had an ad campaign that showed Freestyle Frisbee as part of their marketing. Tom Leitner, Sweeney Vinsel, Dave Murphy, Dave Lewis were all part of this, and they all were shown all around Europe. Tom and Sune went on a tour where they went to virtually every major city in Europe and presented the sport. So now you have it in people's living rooms, you have it at these big music festivals, and we continue to see a huge rapid growth. This growth has sustained itself even till now. So the challenge that faces the sport is where to next. So that was the question that was posed in Medellin, Colombia. And there was two individuals, Alfonso Velez and then also Pablo Azul, who had been playing for quite a period of time and had skills and had the vision, and they understood the sport. They really wanted to present it back into their community. They were eager to do so. So in 2013, then Alfonso came out here to Santa Cruz, where I am now, and he shadowed me. I was the tournament director for the 2013 Freestyle Players Association World Championship, and I showed him how to do it. And so the very next year, 2014, he takes it back to Medellin, had a tremendously successful World Championship competition right there in Medellin, and the rest is history, so to speak. But the way we look at it was this was a model of future growth that we're going to use when we start to branch out to Africa, when we branch out to Asia, Oceania, within Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, all of that. We're looking at what happened in Medellin, where a small number of individuals were playing the sport. They introduced it to friends of theirs who took it as their own sport and ran with it. So what's happening in Medellin, Colombia right now is a model for future success for freestyle Frisbee. But it goes deeper than that. It's also what's happening in Medellin as a culture and as a country has embraced flying disc sports like no other. The Ultimate Team, with their successes at the big WIFDIF World Championships event and the World Games events, that speaks to the popularity and the natural association between Frisbee and Colombia. So I want to thank everyone there. I wish you all the best. Stay safe. This is Skippy Jammer from Santa Cruz. Saludos.